This video analyzes the game played between Lyubarsky, who played with the white pieces, and Soltenbayev, who played with the black pieces. The code of the opening used was C53. This opening is called the Gioacco piano, 4.C3 sidelines. Result, black won the game. What is the first move of the white player? White, pawn moves to e4, one of the best moves on the board. A pawn occupies the center, and two pieces are freed to action. 150 years ago the great Philidor said, "The game cannot better be opened than by advancing the e-pawn 2 squares." This advice is still good today. Only one other white first move, 1.d4, releases two pieces at the same time. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to e5, probably the best reply, says Capablanca. Black equalizes the pressure in the center and trees his queen and a bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to f3. This is superior to such developing moves as 2. Knight moves to c3 or 2. Bishop moves to c4, which are less energetic. The g1 knight comes into play with attack, which cuts down the choice of reply. Black must defend his pawn with 2 black knight moves to c6 or 2 black d6, or he may decide to counter-attack by 2 black knight moves to f6. Whatever his answer, he cannot dawdle. He must do something to meet white's threat. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to c6, undoubtedly the logical move. The pawn is protected without loss of time, and the b8 knight is developed to its best post in the opening in one move. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to c4. Excellent, since the bishop seizes an important diagonal. The bishop strikes at f7, Mac's weakest point. A bishop is utilized to greatest effect either in controlling an important diagonal or in pinning, and rendering useless, an enemy piece. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to c53. Black knight moves to f6 is a good alternative. Either move is in accord with the maxims of the masters, which they advocate and put to use. 1. Get your pieces out fast. 2. Move each piece only once in the opening. 3. Develop with a view to control of the center. 4. Move only those pawns that facilitate the development of pieces, and 5. Move pieces, not pawns. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to c3. White's intentions are clear, he wants to support a pawn advance in the center. His next move, 5.d4, will attack pawn and bishop. To save his e-pawn, black will be forced to play 5 black pawn from file e takes at d4. The recapture by 6. Pawn from file c takes at d4 will give white a strong formation of pawns in the center. White's idea has some point if it can be enforced. If the plan fails, his pawn standing at c3 deprives the b1 knight of its most useful square. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to b6. Chess is not a game to be played mechanically. Usually, moving a piece twice in the opening is a waste of time, but threats must be parried before continuing development. The bishop retreats in order to preempt white's contemplated 5.d4, which attacks pawn and bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to d4 hoping to induce black to exchange pawns. Note that black's e-pawn is attacked, but what do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to e7, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been pawn from file e takes at d4, instead of exchanging pawns, as he would have been compelled to do if his bishop were also under attack. Black defends his e-pawn while bringing another piece into play. His queen has advanced only one square, but even so the move is laudable. The act of leaving the back rank constitutes a developing move. In addition to developing a piece and defending a pawn, black's last move threatens to continue 6 black pawn from file e takes at d4 7. Pawn from file c takes at d4 queen takes at e4, check. Winning a pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, castles on the king's side. Besides the usual benefits derived from castling, safeguarding the king and mobilizing the rook, white's move indirectly protects his e-pawn. It black tries 6 black pawn from file e takes at d4 7. Pawn from file c takes at d4 queen takes at e4, then 8. Rook moves to e1 pins and wins the queen. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to f6. The knight develops with a threat attack on the e4 pawn. Tempting, as it will dislodge the c6 knight from its strong post. The move is natural, but to be censured on several counts. 1. The d-pawn blocks the path of white's own c4 bishop, greatly limiting its action. 2. The range of black's b6 bishop has been increased, now its attack leads straight to white's king. 3. White has moved a pawn while his queenside pieces are crying to be released. In the opening, move only those pawns that help develop the pieces. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to d5. White has moved a pawn while his queenside pieces are crying to be released. In the opening, move only those pawns that help develop the pieces. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to b8. Retreat is safer than moving the knight to the side of the horde. After 7, black knight moves to a5. White's response is 8. Bishop moves to d3, after which he threatens to win the awkwardly placed knight by 9. b4. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3 defends the c-pawn, but the development of another piece is more consistent with opening strategy. Either 8.nbd2 or 8. Queen moves to e2 protects the pawn while bringing one more piece into play. Do not move the same piece twice in the opening. It is interesting to see how black punishes these infractions of principle. On the chessboard, if nowhere else, justice does triumph. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to d6. No exception can be taken to this pawn move. It strengthens the center, opens a path for the c8 bishop and relieves the queen of the burden of watching over the e-pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to h3 to prevent black from pinning his knight by 9. Black bishop moves to g4, but as Publius Syrus observed some considerable time ago, there are some remedies worse than the disease. In disturbing the position of the pawns shielding his king, white weakens organically the structure of the kingside castled position and sets up the unfortunate h-pawn itself as a convenient target for direct attack. All chess theorists affirm the validity of the concept of leaving the kingside pawns unmoved. From Stanton, who said more than 140 years ago, it is seldom prudent in an inexperienced player to advance the pawns on the side on which his king has castled, to Reuben Fine, who said a century later, the most essential consideration is that the king must not be subject to attack. He is safest when the 3 pawns are on their original squares. How does black take advantage of white's last move? What is the best way to expose its imperfections? What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to h6 by playing a move similar to the one I have severely censured. What is the justification for black's advance of the h-pawn? Black has not weakened his defensive position, since his king is not castled on the king's side. His advance of the h-pawn is a gesture of attack, not a timid attempt to ward off a pin. The h-pawn will constitute a base for the g-pawn, which will march up to g5 and then g4. From there it will strike in 2 directions, at white's knight and his h3 pawn. White will be compelled either to capture this pawn or let it capture his own h3 pawn. No matter which exchange occurs, it results in an opening up of the g-file, along which black can align his pieces for an attack on the king. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to e2, a developing move, but it may be too late. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to g5, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been castles on the king's side, a bayonet thrust. The next step is to g4, where the pawn will break up white's position. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to h2 to prevent the intended advance. If the pawn moves on, it will be attacked 3 times and defended only twice. Has black's plan miscarried? What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to g4, not at all. If necessary, black will sacrifice a pawn for the sake of ripping away the defensive screen around white's king. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn from file h takes at g4, practically forced, as black was threatening 12 black pawn from file g takes at h3, as well as 12 black g3. White has managed to close the file, for the time being. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, rook moves to g8. Now it is black who attacks the g-pawn 3 times, while only 2 pieces defend it. Obviously, white may not give his pawn more support by 13.f3, as it's against the law. It exposes his king to check. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at h6, this was a blunder. A better move would have been knight moves to d2, desperately snatching at a loose pawn. In view of his retarded development and the plight of his king, such a capture is risky policy. If any hope remains, it lies in some such move as 13. Bishop moves to e3. Not only does this bring another piece into play, but also in opposing one force with another of equal strength, it neutralizes the pressure of black's bishop. The text move disregards the admonition, do not grab pawns at the expense of development or position. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight takes at g4, gaining time by threatening the bishop among other things. Can white save the game? If he tries 14. Knight takes at g4. Black forces the win by 14. Black bishop takes at g4, attacking the queen, 15. Queen moves to c2. Bishop moves to f3, threatening 16. Black rook takes at g2, check. 17. King moves to h1. Queen moves to h4, checkmate. 16. G3. Queen moves to h4. And mate will come at h1. In this line of play, Black skillfully exploits the helplessness of White's pinned pawns. What do you think it was the next move of the White player? White, bishop moves to e3. The bishop flees and attempts to repel one of the assailants. What do you think it was the next move of the Black player? Black, knight takes at h2. This capture greatly limits White's choice of reply. The knight has taken a piece and now threatens the rook. What do you think it was the next move of the White player? White, king takes at h2, this was a blunder. A better move would have been bishop takes at b6, on the alternative 15. Bishop takes at b6. Black wins by 15. Black pawn from file a takes at b6 16. King takes at h2. Queen moves to h4, check. 17. King moves to g1. Rook takes at g2, check. The fastest, 18. King takes at g2. Bishop moves to h3, check. And White must either walk into mate by 19. King moves to g1. Queen moves to g5, check. 20. King moves to h2 or into a discovered check by 19. King moves to h2. Bishop takes at f1, check. 20. King moves to g1. Bishop takes at e2, when the loss of material is ruinous. What do you think it was the next move of the Black player? Black, queen moves to h4 check. Black has two major pieces operating with full force on the two open files near the enemy king. The attack plays itself. What do you think it was the next move of the White player? White, king moves to g1. White's only move. What do you think it was the next move of the Black player? Black, queen moves to h3 threatening mate on the move. There is no defense that will postpone the mate for long. If 17.g3, then Black continues 17. Black rook moves to h8 18.f3. Bishop takes at e3, check. 19. Queen takes at e3, or 19. Rook moves to f2. Queen moves to h1, checkmate. 19. Black queen takes at g3, checkmate. Or if 17.f3, guarding the g-pawn with his queen, then 17. Black bishop takes at e3, check. 18. Rook moves to f2. Queen takes at g2, checkmate. Is mate. Strange that White, who feared the pin so much, should perish by the pin. To remember from this game, 1. Get your pieces out fast. 2. Move each piece only once in the opening. 3. Develop with a view to control of the center. 4. Move only those pawns that facilitate the development of pieces, and 5. Move pieces, not pawns.